Welcome. In this video, we're going to take a look at a technical overview of what's new in vSphere 8 Update 1. My name is Phelan Moleri, and I'm a Senior Technical Marketing Architect here at VMware. So in October of last year, we released vSphere 8. So that was our new major version of our flagship on-premises infrastructure product. It brought tons of new major updates and new features combined with some smaller improvements as well that we think make it the best vSphere version yet, and we're improving upon that with vSphere 8 Update 1. We can kind of categorize vSphere into three main themes. Operate efficiently, so we want to make it easier for customers to operate their IT infrastructures as efficiently as possible, making it easy to design, configure, and operate these systems. Improvements to vSphere Lifecycle Manager stand out, for example, as well as the new vSphere configuration profiles. There's more flexibility for virtual machines and improved resource management so IT staff can spend more time on more productive tasks. Secondly, security is always on everybody's mind. When you look at vSphere through the lens of that of IT security staff, every feature becomes a security feature. So improvements to the underlying system security defaults, some enhancements in the areas of vTPM, integration with modern identity providers and more mean you spend less time securing things and more time just being secure. It also makes proving your security that bit easier as part of regulatory compliance efforts. And lastly, supercharging workloads. We introduced support for DPUs with the vSphere Distributed Services engine in vSphere 8, and we're building upon additional support for GPU technology to enhance the flexibility of these workloads and for customers to be able to use the latest and greatest hardware accelerators. So let's jump into what's new in vSphere 8 Update 1. And the first theme we're going to look at is operate efficiently. So IT infrastructure is fun and all, but we want to get back to solving interesting business problems and doing that as easily as possible. So first up, let's talk about vSphere configuration profiles. We introduced a technology preview of this in vSphere 8, and it's our next generation of vSphere cluster configuration management. You may be thinking, well, what about host profiles? And host profiles are still there and they're still supported in vSphere 8. vSphere configuration profiles is solving a similar problem, but doing it in a new way. So it uses modern APIs under the hood. It leverages some of the work we've done with the ESXi config store to apply a desired config cluster-wide. You can set the desired configuration at the cluster in the form of a JSON document. You can check that hosts are compliant. You can remediate those non-compliant hosts as well. Now, one of the limitations in the technology preview was that it did not support distributed switches or vSAN environments. Both of those limitations are no longer present in vSphere 8 Update 1, but I will call out that if you are using VMware NSX in your clusters, that is not currently supported to work with vSphere configuration profiles. It uses a lot of the same terminologies that we're familiar with from host profiles and from vSphere Lifecycle Manager, things like check compliance. Are all my hosts in compliant with the desired configuration? We can run some pre-checks to make sure that the hosts are in a healthy state before we attempt to apply configuration. And one of those pre-checks is always that the cluster is in compliance with the vSphere Lifecycle Manager defined image. And obviously we can remediate any drift. So if there's any hosts, like in the example in the screenshot, where the configuration is not to the desired specification, we can remediate and bring that host back into compliance. We can activate vSphere configuration profiles on existing clusters today. So once you upgrade your vCenter to vSphere 8 Update 1 and your clusters to vSphere 8 Update 1, you can transition those clusters from using host profiles or from not using host profiles, if that may be the case, to using vSphere configuration profiles. So there's a guided workflow to help you step through and transition the cluster to be managed using vSphere configuration profiles. You can also activate vSphere configuration profiles on a net new cluster. So right from day one, when you're building a new cluster, you can have the feature activated. You can also import the JSON document even before you add any hosts, and theoretically have your cluster fully configured before you even add those hosts. Now let's take a look at some other improvements in vSphere Lifecycle Manager, and in particularly standalone hosts. Sometimes we take it for granted that all our hosts are going to be nice and safe and nestled in clusters, sitting in data centers, but there's a whole world of standalone ESXi hosts that exist out there. You know, they can run on the edge for various reasons. They can run in vehicles, in boats. They can go be on the back of trucks as they travel around different locations. So we want to make it as easy as possible to manage these standalone hosts, similar to what we do for clusters. So in vSphere 8 Update 1, we've got full user interface support to manage those hosts using vSphere Lifecycle Manager. You can define the image, any vendor add-ons, firmware drivers, whatever it may be. Everything you can do for a cluster, you can now do for a standalone host, including staging and things like ESXi Quick Boot. You can also define custom image depots for each individual standalone host. So this would be useful for those hosts, particularly that sit on the edge, if they're geographically distant from vCenter and there may not be the best connectivity between vCenter and these remote ESXi hosts. And that can cause remediation issues if the link between vCenter and ESXi is poor, and pushing the update payloads down to the host may or may not be the most stable thing. So we can define custom software depots that can be co-located with the ESXi host, and it will use those custom depots to pull new patches, new updates during remediation events. Now, another area that we're making things easier to consume and making life a little bit easier for IT administrators is in the area of vGPU workloads. So today when we're running vGPU workloads, they typically are defined using a vGPU profile, and these profile types are designed for particular workloads. We've got profiles that are for VDI applications, for ML applications, for graphics applications, and these are all defined through our partnership with NVIDIA. Now, one of the limitations when we're running vGPU applications on an ESXi host was that all the profile types must match. So in this example we're showing here, we've got 3 VMs and they must all have the same profile type. In this case, they're using a VDI application-based profile. But in vSphere 8 Update 1, we can now choose different vGPU profiles for our different workloads and have them all share the same underlying GPU resources. So lets us have a lot more flexibility and better consume the GPU resources. Now, one thing that I will call out is that the memory size of the GPU must still be uniform across all virtual machines. So for example, if one of our virtual machines is using an 8 GB GPU memory profile, all subsequent VMs must follow this same GPU memory size. NVIDIA does have some additional sizing guidelines that you can check out on NVIDIA's documentation, and I'll include a link in the description of this video. In the areas of vSphere with Tanzu, we're making it easier for customers and for users to now consume supervisor services. Previously, supervisor services were only available using the NSX networking stack model. We're now delighted to bring these services to the vSphere distributed switch networking stack. So we're bringing supervisor services to more people. Supervisor services are vSphere certified Kubernetes operators, and they deliver infrastructure as a service components, and they're tightly integrated software vendor services to developers. And it makes it very easy to install and manage these supervisor services on the vSphere with Tanzu environment. It's very simply done right from the vSphere client. You can add and make available these supervisor services to your DevOps users, who can then consume them as they need. You can have multiple versions of supervisor services that you can install on supervisors, but only one version at a time can actually be active or can run. Another improvement in the vSphere with Tanzu space is we're making more of an effort to support a bring your own image model. So in previous releases, You could deploy Tanzu Kubernetes clusters on Photon. Then we also introduced Ubuntu flavors. Then with the VM service, we allowed a little bit more flexibility of just traditional virtual machines being deployed. And now we're bringing that a little step forward with our bring your own image model and the improvements to the VM service. So a DevOps or an admin can initiate build pipelines and create images that support Cloud Init or VApp config, and those images then can be saved to a content library. It's very similar to virtual machine templates that we know and love today. The DevOps users that have access to the supervisor clusters or have access to their respective namespaces where they're building and deploying applications can then deploy those available virtual machines from the available content libraries. So it makes it very easy to provide the DevOps users with additional virtual machines built, purpose-built for their needs. Another improvement in the vSphere with Tanzu space is bringing VM consoles to the developers. So I'm sure we've all deployed virtual machines ourselves in the past, and for whatever reason we can't SSH to the VM or we can't RDP to the VM. Maybe something went wrong in the network customization. So what do? We open up a vSphere client and we pop out the VM console, and we're on the virtual machine and we can troubleshoot and figure out what's gone wrong. And we want to bring that facility to the DevOps users as well, but without having to grant them full vSphere client access, because we want to maintain this separation of role and identity here. So now using kubectl vSphere VM web console command, DevOps users that already have current permissions on their namespace and current permissions on the VMs that they've deployed in their namespace can be returned a one-time use web console link, and they'll open this link, copy it into a browser, and they're into their respective virtual machine. So there's no additional vSphere permissions needed. You don't need to grant vSphere client to any of the DevOps users. They can access the virtual machine web consoles using their own familiar tools. Another improvement in vSphere 8 Update 1 is helping customers adopt VMware Skyline Health Diagnostics. So now in Update 1, there's a guided workflow embedded right there in the vSphere client, and you'll see the Install Skyline Health Diagnostics button, which will guide you through deploying the Skyline Health Diagnostics appliance, registering with vCenter, giving it an IP address, passwords, all that usual familiar stuff. And when it's registered with vCenter, you'll have your access to Skyline. You can start doing its analysis, running reports, things like that. So Skyline is a great and powerful tool for customers to help diagnose any issues that might exist in their environment. It's constantly being fed an updated roster of KB articles and definitions to help identify any issues that might exist in an environment. Another powerful use of Skyline Health Diagnostics is being able to react to VMware security advisories. So as they're released, Skyline Health Diagnostics can inspect an environment and tell you whether or not you're actually vulnerable or applicable to any of the published security advisories. In vSphere 8, we introduced some new metrics to capture power consumption of a host, and this included power consumption of the virtual machine workloads, but it was a totality of all VM workloads on an individual host. We did not have the granularity of a per VM basis, but we're delighted to say that we are bringing that level of granularity in vSphere 8 Update 1. Using better VM metrics and taking the VM size into account, we can provide customers more data to aggregate the VM power consumption and better understand the energy efficiency of their workloads. There's two new metrics that are introduced, static power and usage. Static power is the modeled idle power of the VM. So it's as if the VM was a hypothetical bare metal host and how much power would be needed to keep that hypothetical host powered on. Usage is a real measured power based on the VM's active CPU and memory utilization, and it's derived from the host's attached power metrics, so from the IPMI or the Intelligent Platform Management Interface. Now let's switch gears and talk about some of the improvements we're making in the security space. And a lot of these are actually just solving some interoperability problems as well in relation to security features. So security is often a trade-off. Sometimes we have to trade performance, budget, or whatever. And in one such case, when it came to ESXi Quick Boot and TPM 2.0, we had to make a decision. Do we want the operational efficiency of being able to reboot really quickly using ESXi Quick Boot, or do we want the security and secure boot and attestation that comes with TPM? So we couldn't have both. Now in vSphere 8 Update 1, we've solved that incompatibility, and you can now leverage ESXi Quick Boot using the hosts that are protected using a TPM 2.0 device. And you'll see that in the vSphere client in vLCM when you're going to remediate a cluster. Now on those TPM 2 enabled hosts, you should see that Quick Boot is now supported for that particular host. So there's no more having to choose between security and operational efficiency. Similarly, we had an incompatibility in the areas of vSphere fault tolerance and vTPM. So vSphere fault tolerance, been around for several releases now, can provide continuous availability for applications up to 8 CPUs. It creates a live shadow instance of a VM and is constantly being replicated so that if there is an outage, you have immediate failover without any downtime. vTPM is becoming an increasingly important component for guest operating systems nowadays, and particularly Windows 11 requires it to be available, and it enables things like Microsoft Device Guard, Credential Guard, and different OS attestation processes and more. So we had an incompatibility by where you could not protect a virtual machine using vSphere fault tolerance if it was using a vTPM device. That is no longer the case. In vSphere 8 Update 1, you can now fully protect those VMs that have TPM devices with vSphere fault tolerance. Isolating different network types of traffic has always been a best practice, and it helps with security, if things are isolated, and it can be a compensating control for regulatory compliance work. It also helps admins diagnose and resolve performance issues, since it's very easy to identify or troubleshoot an individual storage interface rather than one that might be shared with other services. And in vSphere 8 Update 1, we now allow you to bind NFS traffic to individual vMkernel interfaces. So it's something you can do with iSCSI traffic today, and we're bringing that to NFS data stores as well. You can do it on a per data store level too, so individual data stores can use different network interfaces if you like. And one of the biggest new features in the security theme in vSphere 8 Update 1 is that we're bringing more modern identity provider support to vSphere. So identity management and multi-factor authentication is a big part of security nowadays. So we're adding support for our first cloud identity provider, starting with Okta. So you no longer need to plug Okta into ADFS or use the Okta LDAP functionality, although you can still do both of those things if you want. So Microsoft ADFS is still supported, Active Directory over LDAP is supported, OpenLDAP, the vSphere SSO identity source, they're all still there. We're adding another option using Okta support. There's also support for Okta coming to VMware NSX, so you'll be able to use a single identity provider for both vSphere and NSX in your environment. And we can leverage all the modern multi-factor authentication that Okta provides. And because it's a federated identity, it means vSphere never sees the user credentials. And this helps in both security and compliance efforts as well. It works like most web authentication services you're all used to, where you're redirected to the particular identity service. You'll enter in your credentials, you'll do your multi-factor authentication, and you're redirected back. So vSphere never sees the user credentials, and you're authorized in then based on the user permissions as normal. So now is a good time to mention the vSphere 8 Security Configuration Guide, which is our official hardening guide for vSphere 8. It has changed and it now includes some design guidance, hardware configuration guidance, and more. So feel free to scan the QR code to take you there or input the short link. One of the other updates to the Security Configuration Guide in Update 1 is correlation between other guidance like STIG. So if you're a US federal customer, you're probably familiar with the STIGs, and where possible, we're trying to make the recommendations as identical as possible. So the vSphere 8 Update 1 guide will be available shortly after the release of vSphere 8 Update 1 and will be updated as needed from there. Also want to repeat something that we already spoke about when we talked about the initial release of vSphere 8 last year, is that we're making a lot of the defaults more secure out of the box. So if you, with vSphere 8 and vSphere 8 Update 1, we've looked at all the hardening guidance that we have, and where possible, we've made those the defaults. And because we're doing this, and because we're doing additional hardening testing, we can be more confident that when we do change any default settings, make things more secure, make things more hardened, that we're not going to break any interoperability, both first party and third party. And before we move off the security section, it's a good time to remind you to subscribe to the VMware Security Advisory mailing list so you hear about those security vulnerabilities the moment they're published. So this is not a sign up for any marketing emails. This is purely and exclusive just for the VMware security advisories, and they're emailed to you as soon as they're published. Again, you can take advantage of Skyline as well because it can proactively alert you to these security advisories if you miss your email for whatever reason. And now let's just briefly talk about some of the errors that we're making in supercharge workloads. So we did a lot of work with the DPU technology in vSphere 8, and we're adding additional support for new hardware technology, new accelerator technology as well. But before we talk about that, we're also making an improvement to our VMware DirectPath I technology. So typically in the past, if you needed to add a PCI device using VM DirectPath I, it required the virtual machine to be in a powered off state to do the add, to do the remove. So it introduced some downtime for the particular virtual machine. In vSphere 8 Update 1, we're introducing support to hot add or hot remove NVMe devices using VM DirectPath I. There is a specific hardware certification that must be held by the server to support this, and it's called the PCIe Native Surprise Hot Plug Certification. And this designation should appear on the VMware Hardware Compatibility Guide to let you know that the server or the device supports hot add and hot remove using VM DirectPath I. And the last technology we'll talk about is something that we've been working on with our long-running partnership with NVIDIA. We've worked with NVIDIA for several years now. We've helped worked with them and built the vGPU technology that we spoke about earlier. And now we're extending that partnership even further by adding support for NVIDIA's NVSwitch technology. So today, many AI and high-performance computing applications need just exceedingly high bandwidth between multi-GPU applications. And they're constrained today by the speeds of things like the PCIe Express bus inside our typical hardware. So to solve this, NVIDIA created a special switch called an NVSwitch that allows up to 8 GPUs communicate together at 25 gigabytes per second in each direction, or 200 gigabits per second in each direction. So it's a huge increase in speed, in bidirectional speed from GPU to GPU, much faster than PCIe Express. Now you'll see on the diagram that there's an NV link between each GPU and the NVSwitch. And NV link is the backend protocol for NV switches. And you can use NV link today for GPU to GPU connectivity, and that supports either linking 2 or 4 GPUs at that very high bandwidth. But as we scale above 4 GPUs, that's where the NV switch comes in, and you can use the NV switch in vSphere 8, and you can form partitions of multiple GPUs. You can form partitions of 2, 4, 8 GPUs and apply those to a virtual machine. And you'll apply those to a virtual machine using either vendor device groups or vGPU profiles like we spoke about earlier. So it's keeping vSphere at the forefront of the latest in the high-performance computing technology, this AI and ML surge that we're currently seeing, to allow customers to be able to continue running these workloads that are going to require this massive bandwidth between hardware accelerators and between GPUs. So that wraps up this technical overview of what's new in vSphere 8 Update 1. If you'd like some additional resources, please do subscribe to this YouTube channel. We put out content here quite frequently, not just this video. We have roundtable discussions, we have other technical information that frequently gets published to our YouTube channel. And for everything from the technical marketing team, please do check out core.vmware.com. We have dedicated sites for vSphere, for Cloud Foundation, for vSAN, and other areas in the VMware portfolio as well. So thank you, and I hope you've enjoyed this video.